He was accused of forging history. A soldier pretending to be a scholar, they mocked. At just 36 years old, Ibrahim Traoré stood before a tribunal in Bamako, Mali, facing veiled threats of legal action for allegedly distorting African unity narratives. They called him arrogant, delusional, a danger to continental stability, but none of them knew what he had found. Hidden in a rusted locker beneath a collapsed colonial outpost was a letter. Not just any letter, but one penned by Nelson Mandela, never sent, never seen, until now, and what it revealed would rewrite everything they thought they knew. If this story moved, you don't forget to like the video to support powerful African narratives. Share it with your friends so more people can discover the legacy of leaders like Ibrahim Traoré and the wisdom of voices like Mandela. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more untold stories, deep political insights, and the real struggles shaping Africa's future. Your support helps us keep the truth alive. They called it treason masked as idealism. When Ibrahim Traoré stepped out of the courtroom that morning in Bamako, reporters swarmed him with questions that felt more like accusations. He had just been interrogated for 6 hours by a special regional commission. They claimed he was destabilizing the fragile political balance by spreading unauthorized ideologies, promoting unratified regional unions, and undermining the authority of legal institutions. What they didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that his so-called rebellion wasn't a fantasy of power. It was a response, a reply to a voice that history itself had forgotten. The misunderstanding wasn't just legal, it was moral. To the elite circles entrenched in post-colonial systems, unity without coercion seemed laughable. Traoré had refused to deploy troops along a disputed border. He had vetoed an arms deal that would have flooded the region with Western weapons. And in the private meeting that sparked the charges, he had dared to speak of unity through healing of strength born from listening. Naivete, they had sneered, weakness. But his calm wasn't ignorance. It was conviction. 3 days earlier, hidden in the back of a collapsed records vault near Timbuktu, Traoré had found a leather folder wrapped in wax cloth. Inside was a handwritten letter, unsigned, but unmistakably Nelson Mandela's. The ink had faded, but the fire in the words hadn't. It spoke of a dream Mandela never had the chance to act upon, the peaceful unification of post-conflict African nations through shared language education and cultural diplomacy. It wasn't addressed to any name. It was simply titled, "To the One Who Will Listen." That letter became Traoré's North Star, and when the court accused him of disloyalty, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't defend himself with rhetoric. He stood still, looked his accusers in the eye, and said, "I am not rewriting history, I am finishing it." The media headlines twisted his words. Traoré claims Mandela's legacy, one screamed. Captain or cult leader, another mocked. Social media exploded with ridicule, some calling him delusional, others accusing him of forging the letter. But Traoré remained silent, not out of fear but out of respect. The story wasn't about him. It was about an idea passed through time, buried in dust, waiting for someone bold enough to believe in it. And so the real story began, not in the courtroom, but in the quiet fire of a leader misunderstood, holding a letter meant for generations. A letter that would no longer remain unread. A truth that would no longer remain buried. A man once mocked would soon become the answer to a question Mandela never got to ask. The backlash intensified. Within days of the tribunal, several foreign embassies issued veiled warnings, expressing concern over Traoré's recent statements. One official memo even labeled his language as potentially subversive, accusing him of encouraging cross-border defiance. Rumors began to circulate that a coalition of external powers and domestic elites were quietly building a case to charge him with sedition. On national television, commentators laughed at his idealism. They claimed he had lost touch with reality. Africa doesn't need poets, one anchor scoffed. It needs strongmen. Others accused him of staging the letter for attention, branding it a PR stunt to inflate his fragile authority. The insults came fast, and brutal fraud, fanatic liar. But Traoré didn't respond. He didn't deny the accusations. Instead, he vanished for 48 hours. No press conferences, no statements, only silence. What the world didn't see was where he went. He traveled to an old, forgotten border village where Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger quietly met. It wasn't on most maps. No soldiers patrolled it. No officials had visited in years. And yet the people there lived between 3 flags, speaking 3 dialects, holding 3 IDs, yet calling the same ground home. Traore spent the night in a local hut, not as a president or a commander, but as a listener. He sat with farmers, grandmothers, former fighters, turned fathers. They told him stories not of politics, but of betrayal, of promises made and broken, of peace talked about but never delivered. In those voices he heard echoes of the letter Mandela had written. The walls that divide us are not made of stone, but of silence. Break them with words, and you will see nations in each other. Traore understood then that this wasn't a strategy, it was a truth. Unity could not be commanded, it had to be understood. Forged not in headlines or treaties, but in trust. The next morning he did something unexpected. He called a private meeting in Ouagadougou, inviting only 6 people, 1 poet, 1 teacher, 1 imam, 1 widow, 1 war veteran, and 1 orphan who had lost both parents to tribal violence. No generals, no ministers, just voices of the land. He read them Mandela's letter, line by line, without changing a word. When he finished, he didn't ask for their loyalty. He asked for their wisdom. Each of them, in their own way, said the same thing. Don't lead us from above. Walk with us. That night, Traore stood on his balcony overlooking the city. Below, the streets buzzed with rumors of his political collapse. But he smiled quietly, not in arrogance, but in clarity. The system could mock him. The courts could threaten him. But he had found something they couldn't touch. A voice from the past, a truth buried in dust, and a people ready not to follow orders, but to rise together. The backlash reached its peak when Ibrahim Traoré was officially summoned by the Regional Defense Council. The accusation, negligent endangerment of national security through unauthorized diplomacy. He had been holding unofficial talks with community leaders across the Sahel, talks that bypassed established foreign policy protocols. One high-ranking official called him a rogue element, while state media warned that Traoré's romantic vision of unity could fracture an already delicate region. There were whispers of suspension. Others called for military oversight of his role. In the capital newspapers published caricatures mocking him as a lost child in a grown man's uniform. To many, he had crossed a line that power does not forgive. He had dared to dream outside the institution. But the council didn't know the full story. What they saw as unauthorized meetings were in truth the first seeds of something rare trust. In each village he visited, whether in Mali, Niger, or northern Burkina Faso, Traoré didn't arrive with bodyguards or bulletproof cars. He came with Mandela's letter folded in his breast pocket and a simple question on his lips. What does peace mean to you? The answers he received were not theoretical. They were raw, real. A woman in Dori whispered, "Peace is when I don't have to bury my son before he turns 18. A man in Tilaberi said, "It's when the gunmen ask me to pray with them, not for my life." Traoré documented every story, not as evidence for policy, but as lessons. Then he began writing letters of his own, hundreds of them. One by one, he sent them to local mayors, tribal elders, religious scholars, and youth leaders. He didn't promise them funding. He didn't ask for loyalty. He offered one thing: a seat at the table to reshape the future. What followed stunned even his most devoted critics. An informal gathering in Gorom turned into a spontaneous summit. 43 community representatives showed up without official invitations. They came carrying their own grief, their own histories of betrayal, but also their own proposals for peace. No limousines, no microphones, just circles of chairs beneath the Sahel sun. When Traoré walked in, they stood not because he was a president, but because they saw someone who had listened. The next morning, footage of the gathering leaked online. But instead of humiliation, it sparked awe. People across West Africa began reposting Mandela's words, pairing them with Traoré's actions. For the first time, the headlines changed: a different kind of general, letters that heal. What if unity didn't need borders? The system had tried to put him on trial for breaking rules, but the people had started to put their hope in him for breaking silence. And that Mandela once wrote was the first act of true leadership. They accused him of being a traitor to diplomacy. After the Gorom summit, where no official flags flew and no foreign advisors sat at the table, a formal complaint was filed against Ibrahim Traoré by the Intergovernmental Sahel Security Council. The language was cold and surgical. Engagements conducted outside state-sanctioned channels constitute a breach of cooperative defense protocol. In short, they wanted him silenced. Analysts on international news outlets debated whether Traoré had grown too radical. He's weaponizing emotions, one foreign consultant declared. Peace built on feelings is peace that fractures. Others went further, insinuating he was emotionally unstable, too young, too impulsive to hold power responsibly. But once again, they mistook empathy for recklessness. Traoré didn't retaliate. He didn't speak to the press or issue denials. Instead, he flew privately and unannounced to Robben Island, South Africa, where Mandela had once been imprisoned. He walked the same halls. He sat in the tiny cell that once held the man who changed the world with nothing but words and time. In silence, he placed Mandela's old letter on the floor. Then he knelt and wrote something beneath it. Just one sentence I finally understand. That night, under the pale lights of a Cape Town guest house, he recorded a message. Not a speech, not a manifesto, just a story. He spoke about fear, not the fear of war or death, but the fear of being misunderstood when you choose compassion in a world addicted to vengeance. He talked about the laughter of orphans in Dori, the quiet strength of widows in Gao, the way grief can cross borders even when politics won't. He never once defended himself. He simply asked, what kind of leadership survives history, those who ruled with power or those who listened? He uploaded the video without fanfare. No hashtags, no ads, just the title, For the One Who Will Listen. Within 48 hours, it went viral across the Sahel. Not because it was polished, but because it was honest. A former rebel commander shared it on his feed with the caption, "He speaks like the ones we lost." A youth activist in Senegal called it the most dangerous peace speech in Africa. For the first time, even critics paused. Something had shifted. The accusations, the insults, the legal threats, they began to feel hollow. What many didn't know was that Traoré had started something deeper than a summit or a speech. He had formed what he called the listening circles, groups of civilians in over 60 villages from all social backgrounds, tasked with rewriting what justice meant to them. No politics, no military ranks, just humanity. The council still threatened sanctions. But now the people were no longer silent. Traoré had broken protocol, but he had also broken open a truth that bureaucracy couldn't contain. In the end, the greatest revolution wasn't televised. It was whispered, passed from heart to heart, and led not with orders but with understanding. The backlash turned brutal when an anonymous official leaked an internal memo accusing Ibrahim Traoré of emotional manipulation and unauthorized ideological propagation. The memo suggested placing him under surveillance and restricting his movement beyond national borders. The justification was clear: Traoré's unsanctioned gatherings and rhetorical disruptions were deemed threats to national cohesion. A televised debate followed, where political pundits mocked him openly. One panelist scoffed, "He thinks he's Mandela reincarnated, but you don't unite nations with bedtime stories and barefoot meetings." Another suggested legal action. If he won't follow the chain of command, then let the chain tighten. The irony was painful. Traoré, who had never once raised a weapon in this movement, was being treated like a coup plotter. But even under pressure, he refused to play the game of aggression. Instead, he sent handwritten letters, real ones, to the very officials accusing him. Not in defense, not in apology. In each he enclosed a story, a name, a village, a memory. "This is Aisha," he wrote in one. "She lost her husband to militia fire and opened a school with the same hands that buried him." In another, "This is Adama. He has no legs, but he taught 5 other war amputees how to farm." Each letter ended the same way. "Tell me, is this not nation building?" Some tore the letters up. Some ignored them, but a few read them. And those few couldn't forget what they saw. In a quiet shift that no camera caught, alliances began to change. A senior official from the Interior Ministry visited one of the listening circles in secret. A general sent his aide to observe a cross-border children's poetry event funded by Traore's own salary. What started as mockery now carried a whisper of respect. Even those who still opposed him started to admit he is doing something no one else dares. Meanwhile, the people kept building. In Tessalit, former fighters laid bricks for a community well. In Niamey Street, children who once begged now ran food stalls, supported by a regional network of volunteers. And in Kaya, 2 tribal leaders who hadn't spoken in 10 years stood together under a single flag made by schoolchildren, stitched from the torn pieces of their old ones. None of it made headlines. But it didn't need to. Traore's revolution wasn't designed for screens. It was designed for souls. So when the final legal threat arrived, a formal demand for him to cease all extra-governmental initiatives or face trial, he walked into the press room with no speech, no script. He simply held up Mandela's letter and said, "If justice means silence, then I am guilty. If peace means protocol, then I have failed. But if leadership means listening, then I will never stop." And for once the room stayed quiet, not in disapproval, but in reverence. Because even those who feared him now understood he wasn't breaking the law. He was fulfilling a promise history forgot to deliver. A lesson from silence, the leadership of Ibrahim Traoré. The story of Ibrahim Traoré is not just a political journey. It is a profound lesson in moral leadership, human connection, and the quiet power of listening. At its core, his actions teach us that leadership is not defined by authority or rank, but by the courage to go against the grain when the grain is wrong. He reminds us that to lead is not to command from above, but to walk among the people, to feel their fears, to hear their pain, and to respond not with orders, but with understanding. One of the most striking lessons from Traoré's path is the way he transformed misunderstanding into movement. He was mocked, threatened, and accused of betraying national protocols. Many saw his choices as weakness. His refusal to retaliate, his decision to abandon traditional power, plays his quiet empathy for those in forgotten villages. But these were not signs of surrender. They were signs of strength. Strength rooted in patience, in purpose, in the belief that a leader's greatest weapon is not fear, but trust. When faced with legal threats and ridicule, Traoré never fought back with noise. He responded with action. He met with farmers instead of diplomats. He invited orphans to the table instead of politicians. He carried Mandela's words like a compass, not to repeat history, but to fulfill its unfinished lines. Through every misunderstanding, he kept asking, "What kind of future are we building, and who gets to build it with us?" This teaches us that sometimes the greatest revolutions begin not with fireworks, but with a whisper. Traoré's idea of listening circles proves that progress does not require millions in funding or rows of men in suits. It requires humility. It requires the courage to listen to the voices history ignored. It requires a new kind of bravery, the bravery to pause, to question the path, and to build a new one where others fear to tread. Another lesson lies in how he responded to humiliation. Accused of forging Mandela's letter, he never once argued with his critics. Instead, he chose to act in ways that honored the spirit of the letter itself, through compassion, inclusion, and education. That choice reveals a rare understanding that legitimacy does not come from validation by the powerful, but from faithfulness to the people. His legitimacy was not granted, it was earned step by step, through service, honesty, and quiet resolve. For young leaders, Traoré's journey offers something even deeper. It shows that age, background, and political polish are not prerequisites for transformative change. What matters is conviction. What matters is consistency. What matters is choosing integrity, even when the cameras are off, even when every voice tells you to give up. In a world that often values noise over substance, Traore teaches the lesson of stillness, the power of standing firm when everything around you shakes. His story also urges us to redefine power. Power is not measured by how many follow you blindly, but by how many walk beside you with their eyes open. Power is not in the number of soldiers at your command, but in the number of lives you uplift. Power is not about having the last word. It is about creating space for others to speak. And perhaps the most vital lesson of all real peace begins with memory. Traore did not build his vision out of ambition, but out of remembrance. He remembered Mandela's words. He remembered the suffering of the villagers. He remembered that justice without empathy becomes cruelty in disguise. He remembered that borders are man-made, but the human spirit is not. In remembering the past, he planted the seeds of a different future. We often imagine heroes as loud, charismatic, and relentless. But Traore teaches us that the most powerful heroes may be the ones who sit silently in a circle, listening not for applause but for truth. His journey is a reminder that change doesn't need to begin with everyone believing in you. It only needs one person to believe in something bigger than themselves. So what is the true lesson of Ibrahim Traoré? It is this: lead with heart, listen with purpose, act without fear, and when the world tells you to be quiet, speak through your actions. Because sometimes the softest voice echoes the loudest across history. In a world that so often confuses strength with dominance and leadership with control, Ibrahim Traoré chose a different path. He did not rise by force, nor rule through fear. He led through listening. The most powerful lesson from his story is not about geopolitics or legal defiance. It is about a forgotten truth that real leadership begins in the quiet space between two human beings, when one dares to listen without agenda, and the other dares to speak without fear. Traoré reminds us that empathy is not a weakness. It is a discipline. To sit with pain, to ask without judgment, to withhold reaction, and truly absorb what another person is saying, this takes more strength than shouting orders or enforcing laws. In doing so, he redefined what it means to be powerful. He turned silence into a method, listening into a strategy, and compassion into resistance. One of the most profound lessons from his journey is the value of emotional courage. In the political world, vulnerability is often seen as a liability, but Traoré's choice to remain open, to feel the grief of widows, the hope of orphans, the frustration of forgotten farmers, became the very foundation of his strength. He didn't armor himself in cynicism. He didn't use detachment as protection. He chose to walk into the fire of feeling and emerged with a vision that no weapon could destroy. That vision was rooted in memory. Mandela's memory, yes, but also in the living memories of people history had ignored. By carrying their voices into boardrooms and summits, Traoré forced powerful institutions to confront what they had erased. His leadership was not about representing the masses. It was about returning the mic to them. Another vital lesson lies in how he responded to systemic pressure. When accused of undermining national security, he did not react with outrage or defense. He wrote letters. He shared stories. He shifted the battlefield from courtrooms and council halls to the hearts of the people. Where others saw sedition, he saw connection. Where others heard subversion, he heard sorrow. And in choosing to address not the power structure, but the people within it, he began to change it from the inside out. This is a rare kind of leadership, a subversive kind. It refuses the performance of politics and embraces the substance of humanity. Traoré's strategy wasn't to conquer the system. It was to remind it of its forgotten purpose to serve. He also teaches us something powerful about patience. In an age obsessed with immediacy, where leaders are judged by headlines and popularity polls, Traoré chose the long road. He wasn't chasing applause or seeking quick wins. He was building something meant to last. And that meant accepting ridicule, delay, and invisibility. But in doing so, he became the embodiment of Mandela's lost letter, a message not designed to impress, but to endure. For those in positions of influence, whether political, educational, or cultural, Traoré's story offers a model of radical humility. He invited voices that institutions ignored. He brought a poet and a widow into national strategy. He asked children for insight, not because it made good PR, but because he believed they had something vital to say. This belief that wisdom is everywhere, not just in offices or uniforms, is transformative. Perhaps the most difficult lesson he gives us is this: that justice without listening is violence in disguise. When laws are enforced without understanding, when orders are given without context, when borders are drawn without history, conflict is inevitable. Traoré refused that model. He did not just want unity, he wanted unity that could breathe. That meant making space for contradiction, for discomfort, for healing. This is not easy work. It is not glamorous. It does not win quick victories, but it is the only kind of leadership that sustains peace. Because it does not impose order, it nurtures it. His story also challenges us to rethink what makes a legacy. Too often, legacy is measured by monuments.